It was a rare moment of stillness in Claire's life. Her shoes echoed softly against the wet pavement as she strolled through the park, her mind still buzzing with the events of the day. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds, and the soft patter of rain added a melancholic touch to the otherwise quiet scene. She had never planned to stop here, but the city's noise had become overwhelming, and this place, a small, nearly forgotten corner of the park, offered a temporary escape from the chaos. Claire's phone vibrated in her pocket. She ignored it. It was probably another urgent message from work, but today she was determined to carve out a moment of peace. As she walked past a row of empty swings, something caught her eye. A boy no older than 6 or 7 sat alone on a swing, his small frame hunched against the drizzle. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his body, and his hair, matted with rain, stuck to his forehead. But what struck Claire the most were his eyes, wide, glassy, and fixed on the ground as though he didn't care that the world was falling apart around him. She slowed her pace, a sense of unease creeping up her spine. The boy didn't look up as she approached, nor did he flinch when her shadow fell over him. It was almost as if he were waiting for something or someone. "Hey," Claire called out softly. "Are you okay?" No response. She crouched down to his level, her voice gentle but firm. "Where are your parents?" Finally, the boy stirred. Without looking up, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He held it out toward her with trembling fingers, but still said nothing. Claire hesitated for a moment before taking the note from him, the paper damp against her skin. As she unfolded it, the scribbled words sent a chill down her spine. "Help me. I can't go back." Before she could react, the boy stood up, turned, and vanished into the mist, leaving Claire alone with the rain and the unsettling message. The words on the note swirled in her mind long after the boy had disappeared. "Help me. I can't go back." Claire stared at the note, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing else. No signature, no details, just those 5 haunting words. The rain intensified, soaking through her coat, but she barely noticed. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her pocket before finally pulling out her phone. Missed calls and messages from her assistant, Jessica. Claire sighed. The pressure from her office never stopped, even when she was out of the building. She quickly dialed back, the phone ringing once before Jessica's familiar voice answered. "Where have you been? The clients are waiting," Jessica said, her tone sharp. "I needed a moment," Claire replied, her voice distant as her mind still lingered on the boy and the note. "I'll be back soon." As she hung up, Claire knew that what she'd just seen wasn't something she could ignore. But what could she do? She hadn't even gotten the boy's name or any way to find him again. She stood there, torn between the life she knew, the demands, the constant pull of her career, and the curiosity and concern that the boy's message had ignited. The next morning, she couldn't resist the pull to return to the park. She told herself it was a foolish notion. What were the chances of finding him again? Yet here she was, walking the same path as the day before, her eyes scanning the playground. The swing swayed gently in the morning breeze, but there was no sign of the boy. Disappointment settled in her chest, but it was more than that. The note had stirred something in her, a curiosity that was quickly growing into an obsession. As she looked around, her attention was caught by a man sitting on a bench not far from where the boy had been. He was watching her, his face partially hidden by the brim of a hat. Claire approached him cautiously. "Excuse me, have you seen a boy around here? He was sitting on that swing yesterday." The man's eyes flickered with recognition, but he remained silent, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. Something about his demeanor sent a warning through Claire, but before she could press further, he stood abruptly and walked away. Now more certain than ever that there was something wrong, Claire decided to take the next step. She couldn't just leave this alone. Pulling out her phone, she snapped a picture of the note and sent it to a contact she hadn't spoken to in years, someone who owed her a favor. Hours passed with no response, and as the day slipped into evening, she debated whether to continue pushing for answers. Just as she was about to put it all out of her mind and move on, her phone buzzed. The message was brief, but enough to send her heart racing. You need to stop asking questions. The cryptic message, you need to stop asking questions, left Claire unsettled. She reread the text multiple times, trying to figure out who had sent it. There was no name, no context, just a clear warning. Yet, instead of deterring her, it only fueled her curiosity further. For the next few days, Claire couldn't focus on anything else. Every time she tried to dive back into work, her thoughts drifted back to the boy and the mysterious note. She was a woman of logic and control, but this situation defied reason, and it gnawed at her, consuming her thoughts and pulling her further from her structured life. Determined to find more answers, she visited the park again. This time, she wasn't just wandering aimlessly. She questioned the vendors and regulars, trying to learn more about the boy or anyone who might have seen him. But nobody seemed to know anything. Some gave her polite smiles, others shook their heads, and a few seemed uncomfortable with her questions. As she was about to give up, an older woman approached her, cautious but curious. "I saw you here a few days ago," the woman said. "You were with that little boy, weren't you?" Claire's heart skipped. "Yes, I was. Do you know him?" The woman hesitated, glancing around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "I've seen him a few times, never with an adult. He always seems so lost." Claire leaned in closer, her voice lowering. "Do you know anything about his family?" The woman shook her head. "No, but I saw him with a man once. Tall, dark coat, always in a hurry. I thought it was odd. The boy never looked happy when he was around." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Could this man be the same one she saw at the park? "When was this?" she asked, but the woman seemed nervous now. "That's all I know, dear," she muttered, backing away before Claire could ask anything else. Disheartened, but more convinced than ever that something was off, Claire returned home that night. The pieces didn't add up, and with each new fragment of information, the mystery deepened. Who was the man in the park? Why was the boy always alone? And what was he so afraid of? Her mind swirled with questions, but for now, she had no answers. She couldn't let it go. Claire was always someone who solved problems, who controlled the outcomes. Yet, this situation left her grasping at shadows. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. It was a text from a contact she had reached out to earlier, the one who owed her a favor. "I found something. Meet me tomorrow. Don't bring anyone." The message was short, but it was enough. Claire knew she was about to dive deeper into something far bigger than she anticipated. The next morning, Claire found herself pacing outside a small, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. The sun hadn't fully risen, casting a grayish hue over everything. She checked her watch. It was early, but she didn't want to risk being late. The stakes were too high now, and every minute felt like a countdown to an impending revelation. Her contact, a former investigative journalist named Max, had agreed to meet here. They hadn't spoken in years, but Max was the type of person who always knew something. He had connections in places she could only imagine, and she needed someone like him to help uncover the truth. Max arrived, looking more disheveled than she remembered, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He slid into the chair across from her, his expression serious. "You're playing a dangerous game, Claire." "I didn't ask to play," she responded, keeping her voice calm but firm. "I just want to know what's going on." Max sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I did some digging. The boy you mentioned, he's not just any kid. He's connected to something big, something dark." Claire leaned forward, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "There's been a string of disappearances. Kids around the city. The authorities haven't linked them yet, but some of us who are still looking into it, we see the pattern. The boy fits that profile." Her stomach tightened. "Disappearances? What does this have to do with me?" Max hesitated. "That note you got, it wasn't random. Someone wanted you to find that kid. They know who you are, what you do. They're using you." Claire felt the weight of his words settle over her like a lead blanket. She had been pulled into this unknowingly, and now it seemed there was no way out. "Why me?" Max shrugged. "I don't know, but I do know this. Whoever's behind this is powerful. You keep poking around, you're going to attract attention. The wrong kind. Claire clenched her fists, feeling frustration build inside her. She wasn't the type to walk away from a challenge, but now, she wasn't sure what she was facing. So what do I do? Max's eyes locked with hers, deadly serious. You stop. You walk away before it's too late. But Claire knew she couldn't do that. She couldn't ignore what she had uncovered. I can't just leave this, Max. That boy is in danger. Max shook his head, standing up. Then I can't help you anymore. As he walked out of the cafe, Claire sat in stunned silence. Max had given her more information than she'd had before, but it only made things worse. Now, she knew the boy was in real danger, and she was tangled up in something far bigger than herself. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from her assistant, Jessica. Where are you? You've got 3 meetings today, and you're already late for the first. Claire knew she was walking a tightrope. Her professional life was demanding her attention, but this mystery had now consumed her. She could feel it pulling her in deeper, and she had to make a choice. But even as the weight of her responsibilities loomed over her, the image of the boy, alone, scared, needing help, was something she couldn't forget. Her decision was made. She wasn't walking away. Claire had never felt so divided in her life. As she sat in the back of the cab, heading to her office, her mind kept returning to Max's warning. His words echoed in her thoughts. They're using you. But who are they, and why her? She tapped her fingers against her thigh, the tension building with each passing minute. Her phone buzzed again, reminding her of the growing pile of work awaiting her at the office. Jessica had already left 3 more messages, and Claire knew her absence was causing ripples through her professional world. Normally, she'd be right there at the helm, steering everything into place. But now, something much larger loomed over her thoughts, pulling her away from the structured, predictable life she once held so tightly. Arriving at the office, Claire walked straight into her meeting, her face a mask of professionalism. She sat at the head of the table, her team rattling off numbers and projections. Yet, her mind wandered back to the boy, to the note, and the disappearances Max had mentioned. She found herself checking her phone, half expecting another cryptic message. As the meeting dragged on, her phone lit up with a new notification. But this time, it wasn't from Jessica or any unknown sender. It was a message from an unfamiliar number. Leave this alone or you'll regret it. Her chest tightened. The words were a direct threat, one that pushed her even further into this tangled web. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, her hands trembling slightly. No one else in the room noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor. She couldn't let them see her fear, her uncertainty. She was Claire, always in control, always composed. But this time, something felt very different. As the day ended and she left the office, Claire knew she had to make a decision. She could either heed the warning, return to her regular life, and forget about the boy and the note, or she could push forward, risking everything: her job, her reputation, even her safety. She walked aimlessly through the city streets, the noise of traffic and the hum of city life surrounding her, but it all felt distant. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and determination. When she finally looked up, she realized she had wandered back to the park. The swings were empty, just like the day she first encountered the boy. Claire stood there, her mind racing, when suddenly she felt someone watching her. She turned, and there, across the street, stood the man she had seen before, the one sitting on the bench. His dark coat swayed in the breeze, his hat casting a shadow over his face. Without thinking, Claire crossed the street, her heart pounding. But as she approached, the man turned and walked briskly away, disappearing into the crowd. Claire followed, weaving through pedestrians, her adrenaline surging. She couldn't let him get away this time. She needed answers. But just as she thought she was catching up, a black car pulled up beside her, its window rolling down slowly. Inside, a man with cold, piercing eyes looked at her, and spoke in a low voice. "It's time to stop, Claire. You don't know what you're getting into." Before she could respond, the car sped off, leaving her standing in the middle of the sidewalk, breathless and shaken. She realized now that she was in deeper than she had imagined. The danger was real, and whoever was behind this didn't just want her to stop. They were making sure she knew the stakes. The chilling encounter left Claire reeling, but also more determined than ever. There was no way she could walk away now. She needed to understand who these people were, why they were involved, and what connection the boy had to all of this. But with every new piece of the puzzle, her trust in the people around her began to fray. Back at the office the next day, things felt different. Jessica was acting strange. Her usually punctual and efficient assistant seemed distracted and nervous. There were quiet glances exchanged between her and the other employees, things Claire would normally shrug off. But now she noticed every detail, every flicker of doubt in the room. As Claire entered her office, Jessica followed her in, hesitating at the doorway. "Is everything all right?" Claire asked, narrowing her eyes. Jessica nodded quickly, but her eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. "Of course everything's fine. Just a lot going on." "Right," Claire responded, but her instincts told her something was off. She watched Jessica closely, her behavior adding another layer of suspicion. For the first time, Claire questioned her loyalty. Was Jessica hiding something? Could she be involved? As the hours passed, Claire's unease grew. She decided it was time to confront her assistant. After all, Jessica knew too much about her schedule, her movements, and even her personal life. If someone was feeding information to the people behind the warnings, Jessica was in the perfect position to do it. Later that evening, Claire asked Jessica to stay behind after the office cleared out. The city lights flickered outside the large windows as the tension between them grew. "We need to talk," Claire said, her voice steady but firm. Jessica shifted in her seat, her eyes wide. "About what?" "I've noticed some things recently," Claire began, watching her closely. "Strange messages, warnings, and you acting differently. What's going on, Jessica?" For a moment, Jessica said nothing. Then, she let out a long sigh, looking down at her hands. "I didn't want to tell you this, Claire. I was trying to protect you." Claire's stomach tightened. "Protect me from what?" Jessica's voice trembled. "From them. They approached me weeks ago. I didn't know what to do. They're dangerous, Claire, and they've been watching you." Claire felt the floor drop beneath her. So it was true. Jessica had been involved. But why? And for how long? "They told me to keep an eye on you, to report your movements," Jessica continued, her voice barely a whisper now. "I didn't know what they were planning at first, but when I realized how deep it went, I couldn't back out. They threatened me." Anger surged through Claire, but there was also a pang of sympathy. She understood fear. She had felt it herself in recent days. But betrayal, that was harder to swallow. "And you never thought to tell me? You just went along with it." "I was scared," Jessica whispered, her eyes pleading. "But I'm telling you now, because it's getting worse. They're watching every move you make, and they won't stop until you're out of the picture." The room fell into a heavy silence as Claire processed what Jessica had said. She felt betrayed, but at the same time, the pieces were finally starting to come together. This was bigger than she had imagined, and now it wasn't just about the boy. It was about survival. "I can't stop," Claire said quietly. "I need to know the truth." Jessica's face paled. "Then you need to be careful. They're not just watching, they're waiting." Claire's mind reeled with Jessica's confession. The idea that she had been watched, that her every move was under scrutiny, sent chills down her spine. She felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. The boy, the note, the warnings, everything seemed to fit together like pieces of a dark puzzle. And now she knew the stakes were higher than she had imagined. That night, she barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the events of the past few days, especially the boy's haunted eyes and the crumpled note he'd handed her. "Help me. I can't go back." The words echoed through her thoughts, but what did they mean? Who couldn't Lucas go back to? Claire needed answers, and she knew that time was running out. The next morning, she reached out to someone who could help, Anton, a private investigator who had a reputation for taking on tough, off-the-record cases. If anyone could help her find Lucas and uncover the truth, it was him. "Can you find him?" Claire asked, her voice tense with urgency. Anton's response was careful. "Who exactly are you looking for?" "A boy, about 6 or 7 years old. His name might be Lucas. I don't know much more than that, but I think he's in danger." Anton paused, considering. If the boy is involved with something dangerous, this could take time, and it won't be easy. "I don't care how long it takes," Claire said, her voice firm. "I need to find him." With that, Anton agreed to take the case. Claire knew it was a risk, but at this point, she had no other options. She couldn't shake the feeling that the boy was out there, waiting for someone to help him. Later that afternoon, Anton called back with some news. "I think I've found something," he said. "The boy you're looking for, his name is Lucas Shalai, and he's not just any kid." Claire's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "Lucas is the son of Marco Shalai," Anton continued, his tone grave. "You know that name?" The name sent a shock through Claire. Marco Shalai was infamous, connected to organized crime, corruption, and illegal activities that span countries. He was a man who operated in the shadows, and his reputation for ruthless business dealings was well known in certain circles. "What does that mean for Lucas?" Claire asked, her voice quiet but urgent. "From what I can gather, Lucas has been missing for a while. Officially, no one's looking for him. But Shalai isn't exactly a man who plays by the rules. If his son is on the run, or if Lucas knows something he shouldn't, then there's a reason why you were warned to stay away." Claire's stomach twisted. She had walked straight into a dangerous game, and now it was clear that Lucas was at the center of something much bigger than she had anticipated. "Do you know where he is?" she asked. "Not yet," Anton replied, "but I'm working on it. Be careful, Claire. Shalai is dangerous, and if you're getting involved in this, you need to watch your back." As she ended the call, Claire's mind raced. Lucas wasn't just a lost boy. He was the son of a powerful, dangerous man. And now, she was entangled in something far more dangerous than she had ever expected. The revelation about Lucas's identity left Claire rattled. She knew now that she was dealing with something far more serious than she'd originally thought. Marco Shalai wasn't just any man. He was a dangerous figure with connections that stretched deep into criminal networks. And somehow his son, Lucas, had fallen into Claire's world. Despite the warnings, Claire couldn't walk away. She had to know more. She had to find Lucas. But she also knew that the more she dug, the closer she came to putting herself in real danger. At work, the tension was palpable. Jessica was quieter than usual, her movements cautious, as though she was walking on eggshells around Claire. The recent revelations about Jessica's involvement with those watching her left a bitter taste in Claire's mouth, and while she hadn't completely confronted her assistant yet, she knew she had to tread carefully. If Jessica was still compromised, Claire couldn't afford to let her guard down. That afternoon, just as Claire was about to leave for a meeting, Jessica appeared in her doorway. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice tight. Claire frowned. "Who?" Jessica hesitated. "A man. He said his name is Marco Shalai." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Shalai, here, in her office. Her mind raced. How had he found her? Had he known all along that she was involved in looking for Lucas? A cold wave of fear washed over her, but she couldn't let it show. She couldn't let Shalai see her rattled. "Send him in," Claire said, her voice steady despite the tension building inside her. Moments later, a tall, imposing man stepped into the room. Marco Shalai. His presence was intimidating, the air around him charged with a quiet menace. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Claire as he closed the door behind him. "Claire Donovan," Shalai said smoothly, his voice low and deliberate. "I've heard a lot about you." Claire stood up, meeting his gaze. "I can't say the same." Shalai's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you know who I am, and I'm sure you know why I'm here." Claire swallowed hard, but her voice remained firm. "If this is about Lucas..." Shalai held up a hand, cutting her off. "Let's not play games, Ms. Donovan. I know you've been looking for my son. I know you've been asking questions. And I'm here to tell you, for your own sake, to stop." Claire's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Why is Lucas running? Why did he ask for my help?" Shalai's eyes darkened. "Lucas is my son. He's a child who doesn't understand the world he's living in. You're out of your depth, Ms. Donovan. This situation is far more complicated than you think." Claire stood her ground. "If that's true, then why threaten me? Why not just tell me what's going on?" Shalai's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "Because you're not part of this. You don't belong in this world. And if you keep pushing, you'll regret it." The threat hung heavy in the air, but Claire wasn't backing down. "I can't just ignore a boy who asked for help. If Lucas is in danger." Shalai stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The only danger Lucas is in is from people who think they can use him. I won't let that happen. And you? You need to understand that you're only seeing a fraction of what's really going on." Claire's pulse quickened. There was something deeper at play here. Something Shalai wasn't telling her. But she could also sense that pushing him any further now would be dangerous. Shalai straightened, his tone shifting back to cold professionalism. "This is your last warning, Ms. Donovan. Stay out of it. Walk away, and we'll forget this ever happened. If you don't, well, I don't need to explain what will happen." With that, Shalai turned and left, leaving Claire standing in the middle of her office, her heart pounding. She had faced many challenges in her career, but this was different. This was personal. And now, she knew that walking away wasn't an option. Lucas needed her help, and she wouldn't back down. As she sat back down at her desk, her phone buzzed. A message from Anton. "I found something. We need to meet." The game of deception was far from over. If anything, it had just begun. Claire read Anton's message with a growing sense of urgency. The meeting with Marco Shalai had rattled her more than she cared to admit. His presence in her office had been a clear warning. This was no longer a game. But now that she was in this deep, there was no turning back. She needed to meet with Anton and figure out the next steps. Later that evening, Claire arrived at a secluded cafe in a quieter part of the city. The dimly lit atmosphere suited the gravity of their conversation, and she spotted Anton sitting in a booth at the back. His expression was serious as he waved her over. "Thanks for coming," Anton said, his voice low. He looked around cautiously, ensuring no one was paying attention to them. "I found out more about Lucas and his father. It's worse than we thought." Claire sat down, her heart racing. "What did you find?" Anton slid a folder across the table. "It's all in there. Shalai's network is vast, but he's not just involved in organized crime. He's part of a larger syndicate that deals in human trafficking, black market deals, and political manipulation. And from what I can gather, Lucas is more than just his son. He's a liability." Claire's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" "Shalai's been grooming his son for years," Anton explained. "Lucas was supposed to be part of his father's world, but something went wrong. Lucas learned too much too quickly, and now he knows things that could take down his father's entire operation. That's why Shalai is so desperate to get him back." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Lucas wasn't just running from an abusive father. He was running from a man who saw him as a threat. And now, she was caught in the middle of it. "Does Lucas know all of this?" Claire asked. "From what I've pieced together, yes," Anton replied. "That's why he reached out to you. He must have seen you as someone outside his father's reach, someone who could help him disappear." Claire leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. "So what do we do now?" Anton looked grim. "We need to find Lucas before Shalai does. If he gets his hands on his son, there's no telling what will happen. And if Shalai thinks you're getting too close..." Claire nodded, understanding the unspoken threat. "Then we don't have much time." Anton stood up, his face tense with determination. "I'll keep digging, but you need to be careful. Shalai has eyes everywhere. The moment he thinks you know too much, he'll come for you." As Claire left the cafe, her mind was spinning with the weight of everything Anton had told her. Lucas was in more danger than she had realized, and now she was in the crosshairs of one of the most dangerous men in the city. But one thing was clear: she couldn't walk away. Lucas needed her, and she wasn't going to let him down. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and paranoia. Claire felt as if she were being watched constantly. Every glance from a stranger on the street, every unexpected phone call, every shadow in her periphery set her on edge. The weight of Shalai's presence loomed over her life like a dark cloud, threatening to engulf everything. Jessica, ever silent and guilty since her confession, had become even more distant. Claire still hadn't confronted her fully about her involvement with Shalai's people, but the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Every time Jessica entered her office, Claire's eyes followed her, wondering if she was still feeding information to Shalai's network. One evening, as Claire was preparing to leave the office, she noticed something strange. Jessica was acting more nervous than usual. Her hands trembled as she gathered her things, and she avoided eye contact with Claire altogether. Something was wrong. "Jessica," Claire said, her voice cutting through the silence. "We need to talk." Jessica froze, her back still to Claire. Slowly, she turned around, her face pale and her eyes filled with fear. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play dumb," Claire replied, standing up from her desk. "You've been working for Shalai's people, feeding them information about me, and now you're going to tell me the truth." Jessica's lips trembled. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of breaking down, but then something shifted. Her expression hardened, and she met Claire's gaze with a defiant glint in her eye. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Claire's heart skipped. The change in Jessica's demeanor was startling, but she kept her voice calm. "Tell me the truth, Jessica. What's really going on?" Jessica let out a bitter laugh. "You were never supposed to get this far. I was supposed to keep an eye on you, keep you out of trouble. But you..." She shook her head. "You had to push. You had to keep digging. And now look where it's gotten you." Claire's blood ran cold. "So it's true. You've been working for them." Jessica nodded slowly, her eyes darkening. "I didn't have a choice. They came to me weeks ago, before you even met Lucas. They knew you were involved, and they wanted me to keep you close. But now you're in too deep." Claire took a step closer, her voice low and dangerous. "Why are you telling me this now?" Jessica hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Because it's over. Shalai's done playing games. He's coming for you, Claire. And when he does, there won't be anything I can do to stop him." Claire's mind raced. She had suspected Jessica's betrayal for a while, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of nausea through her. Shalai was closer than she had realized, and now he was coming for her. "What does he want?" Claire asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. Jessica's expression softened, her defiance crumbling. "He wants Lucas, and he wants you out of the way. You're a loose end now, Claire. You know too much." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of Jessica's betrayal hung heavy in the air, suffocating the space between them. Claire had trusted Jessica for years, and now that trust had been shattered beyond repair. "Is that why you've been acting so strange?" Claire asked quietly. "Because you knew this was coming." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want it to go this far. I didn't want you to get hurt, but I didn't have a choice. They threatened me, Claire. They threatened my family." Claire's anger softened, replaced by a deep sadness. She could see now that Jessica had been caught in Shalai's web just as much as she had, but didn't change the fact that Jessica had betrayed her. Before Claire could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Anton. "I found Lucas. You need to come now." Claire's heart raced. She turned to Jessica, her voice cold and determined. "It's over, Jessica. I don't care what Shalai wants. I'm going to find Lucas, and I'm going to protect him." Jessica didn't respond, her face pale and stricken with guilt. Without another word, Claire grabbed her things and left the office. The game had changed, and now It was a race against time. Claire raced through the darkened streets, her heart pounding in her chest. Anton's message had been clear. He had found Lucas, and time was running out. She didn't know what awaited her when she arrived, but one thing was certain. She had to reach the boy before Shalai did. The address Anton had sent her led to a crumbling, abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. The area was quiet, almost eerily so, with the only sound being the distant hum of traffic. Claire parked her car a block away and approached the building on foot, her senses on high alert. As she reached the entrance, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Anton. Inside. Be careful. It's not safe. Claire's pulse quickened. She stepped through the cracked doorway, the air inside cold and stale. The dim light filtering through the broken windows cast long shadows across the room, adding to the tension that hung in the air. She scanned her surroundings, searching for any sign of Anton or Lucas. Suddenly, she heard a soft noise. A footstep, perhaps, coming from a hallway to her right. Instinctively, she moved toward the sound, her nerves on edge. As she reached the end of the hall, she spotted Anton standing in the corner of a small, dimly lit room. You came, Anton said, his voice low and tense. Claire nodded, her eyes searching the room for Lucas. Where is he? Anton gestured toward the far side of the room, where a small figure sat huddled against the wall. Claire's heart sank when she saw him, Lucas. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, but he was alive. Relief flooded through her, but was quickly overshadowed by the reality of the situation. They weren't safe yet. Is anyone else here? Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Anton shook his head. Not yet, but we need to move fast. Shalai knows we're here. Claire crouched down beside Lucas, her voice soft as she spoke to him. Lucas, do you remember me? I'm here to help you. The boy's eyes met hers, and for the first time since their encounter in the park, Claire saw a flicker of recognition. He nodded slowly but didn't speak. He was still terrified, and Claire couldn't blame him. The weight of his father's shadow hung heavy over them all. We have to get out of here, Anton said urgently. Shalai's men are probably on their way. Claire stood up, ready to move, but just as they began to leave, a low voice echoed through the room. You're not going anywhere. Claire's blood ran cold as she turned to see Marco Shalai standing in the doorway, flanked by two imposing men. His expression was calm, almost amused, as though he had been expecting this all along. Shalai, Anton growled, stepping forward defensively. Shalai raised a hand, signaling his men to stay back. His eyes were fixed on Claire, cold and calculating. You really thought you could hide from me, didn't you? Claire swallowed, her heart racing. I'm not hiding, she said, her voice steady. I'm here to protect Lucas. Shalai's lips curled into a cold smile. Protect him? From what? Me. I'm his father. Claire stood her ground. You're using him, and you know it. Lucas deserves a chance to be free from whatever you're trying to pull him into. Shalai's smile faded, replaced by a dangerous glint in his eyes. You have no idea what you're talking about. Lucas is my son. He's mine to protect. You're just an obstacle. Claire's pulse quickened. She knew this was the moment where everything could fall apart. Shalai wasn't bluffing. He had the power to end this, to end them all. But Claire wasn't backing down. You don't own him, Claire said firmly. Lucas has a right to his own life. You can't control him forever. Shalai's expression darkened, his gaze flickering to Lucas. You've made a mistake, Ms. Donovan. A very costly mistake. In an instant, Shalai's men moved forward, but Anton was faster. He pulled Claire and Lucas back, shielding them as he positioned himself between them and Shalai's men. We're leaving, Anton said, his voice cold and firm. Shalai's eyes narrowed, but he didn't stop them. Instead, he took a step back, his gaze fixed on Claire. You won't get far, and when I catch up to you, you'll regret this. Claire didn't wait to hear more. She grabbed Lucas's hand and rushed out of the building, Anton close behind. The moment they were outside, they ran. Down the street, through the shadows, away from the looming threat of Shalai's wrath. They didn't stop until they were sure they were far enough away, and only then did Claire allow herself to breathe. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't let her guard down yet. Shalai wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The days that followed were a blur of constant movement and paranoia. Claire, Anton, and Lucas had gone into hiding, doing everything they could to stay off Shalai's radar. Anton had contacts in places that offered temporary refuge, but Claire knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Lucas remained quiet, rarely speaking unless spoken to. The weight of everything he had experienced, his father's control, the secrets he carried, was too much for a child to bear. But Claire did her best to reassure him. She had made a promise to protect him, and she intended to keep it. One evening, as they sat in a small, secluded cabin Anton had secured for them, Claire finally found a moment to speak with Lucas privately. The air was thick with the scent of pine trees, and the quiet of the forest around them offered a rare sense of peace. "Lucas," Claire said gently, sitting beside him, "I need to know what you want. I know your father is dangerous, but if you want to go back—" "No," Lucas interrupted, his voice soft but firm. His eyes, so full of fear before, now held a glimmer of determination. "I can't go back, not ever." Claire nodded, her heart aching for the boy. "You don't have to. I'll keep you safe." Lucas glanced up at her, a question in his eyes. "Why are you helping me?" Claire paused, considering her answer. "Because you deserve better than what your father was trying to make you into. You deserve a chance to live your own life." Lucas looked down, his small hands fidgeting in his lap. "I thought no one would help me." Claire's chest tightened. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Lucas. You're safe with us." For the first time, Lucas allowed himself to relax, even if just a little. It was a small victory, but it meant everything to Claire. Over the next few days, Anton worked tirelessly to secure a new identity for Lucas. It wasn't easy. Shalai's influence ran deep, and finding a way to give the boy a fresh start required navigating a complex web of legal and illegal channels. But Anton was resourceful, and slowly, a plan came together. One evening, just as the sun began to set over the trees, Anton approached Claire with a final update. "It's done," he said quietly. "Lucas has a new identity. He can disappear, start over somewhere far from here." Claire felt a wave of relief, but it was bittersweet. She had grown attached to Lucas over these past few days, and the thought of letting him go was harder than she had anticipated. But she knew it was the only way to keep him safe. Lucas, sensing the finality of the moment, stood beside Claire, his small hand slipping into hers. "Thank you," he whispered. Claire smiled down at him, her heart full of conflicting emotions. "You're going to be okay, Lucas. You'll have a new life, a better one." Lucas nodded, his expression serious. "I know." As Anton made the final arrangements, Claire knelt down beside Lucas, her voice soft. "Remember, you're stronger than you think. And no matter what happens, you're free now." With that, Lucas gave her a small, brave smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Claire that they had done the right thing. Lucas would have a chance at a new life, free from the shadow of his father. As they watched Lucas drive away with Anton, Claire stood alone in the fading light, the weight of the past few weeks settling over her. She had risked everything to protect the boy, and now she had to find her own path forward. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from an unknown number. "It's not over." Claire stared at the screen, her heart pounding once more. Shalai wasn't finished with her yet, but as she looked out over the quiet forest, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't finished either. Hey there. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps us grow and bring more captivating stories your way. We'd love to hear from you. What moment from this story had the biggest impact on you? Was it the suspense, the twists, or maybe the final confrontation? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're there, feel free to suggest new story ideas you'd like to see on the channel. Your input is super important, and who knows, your idea might be featured in our next video. Thanks for being a part of this journey, and we can't wait to bring you more.